Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ready Speaker. Your host today is Roland Urucci. That is me. I'm actually the host every time, unless maybe I'll give it to somebody else, but I doubt it. Definitely have guests on here, so I'm always the host. I may have guests. So today's episode is a revisit on Fleishman is in Trouble. It was an HBO Max series. I did an episode for the first half of the season, and now I'm wrapping it up. It took a little while for me to get into it, I think, and really think about it and see what I thought about this series. All right, right off the bat, I'm not sure I really enjoyed it. There are parts of it that I enjoyed, and I think I brought it up last time, where I really enjoyed the character played by Lizzie Kaplan, and her voiceover work in it, sort of the story coming from her perspective. And I think, hey, there are spoilers with this, so I think that sort of plays into the whole series for me. I'm not really a big fan of Explain. Sometimes it works well. You have Wonder Years, you have a whole bunch of things. This is very much Wonder Years and Desperate Housewives, which I think I spoke about last episode too. That it has that sort of feel, that sort of cadence in it. So it's an interesting voice that plays along and brings you along from their perspective of what's going on and their descriptors of the characters. So you have Jesse Eisenberg, Claire Danes. Jesse Eisenberg is Toby Fleishman. Claire Danes is Rachel Fleishman, divorces Toby, has a sort of a midlife crisis. So there's a lot of role reversal in this series, and it plays through the whole series where Claire Danes is a very successful partner in the relationship who's not a good mother, is really hung up on wealth, status, what she can latch onto, who she can latch onto, which comes into play as well. So she has an affair with a status person, almost like a dad guy, but like the sexy dad guy who's hip and knows what to talk about, and finds time. So they have this relationship after the divorce with Jesse Eisenberg, who goes into an apartment, and he's the one taking care of the kids. He's struggling, and there's a lot of things. This is a very much a privileged person story. So Jesse Eisenberg is a doctor, even though it's frowned upon as a profession, not by the Claire Danes circle of people, which are more like just inherently wealthy hedge fund managers, bankers, inherited wealth. So he looks like, sweet of you. It's very sweet of you that you're a doctor. Even though he's probably pulling in $300,000-$400,000 a year, leading a team, being head of a lot of things. So it's kind of weird. They have nice apartments. I mean, the original apartment that Claire Danes has is mansion apartment that's just insane with the insanely high ceilings, which to me it just looks like a studio. At that point, once ceilings go above 10 feet, it's kind of like that's just built out. I know they show it a lot in old movies and TV shows, but it just means that it's a stage, and nobody really has that sort of apartment. And then you have Toby's apartment, which is a 2-bedroom, probably just post World War II sort of building, 8-foot ceilings on the Upper East Side, and sort of big windows, big picture, picture frame windows and stuff like that. So again, he's complaining about where he's living and what he lived with through this whole series, and how the burden of the children lands on him, and he's trying to find his way as a parent, as a man, in a female role, or stereotypical female role of being the nurturer, being the cook, being the one who's trying to talk through the missteps that the children have, trying to see what the children are like. And then you have Claire Danes, who just vanishes and has a mental breakdown, and we discover this by the end. And this is where the Libby Epstein or Lizzie Kaplan part, I'm just reading the names off IMDb, this is where this thing plays in for me. I don't know and I know all these stories are make-believe is based on a novel, but to me, the way it plays out, the way it makes sense, otherwise it's actually not enjoyable at all, is that Lizzie is telling a story of what ifs, because she's unsure about her marriage, and she's unsure about if she should have an affair, and she's unsure about where her success could have led her as she became a housewife, with her husband being a lawyer. And even though she wanted to do something, she's a writer, journalist, she felt that she was always attracted to people who could maybe help her step up. But then Christian Slater plays this misogynistic character in the story now, how successful he is with his story about sort of angry middle-aged guy who just hates women now and only thinks they're property or just used for his pleasure. So he's sort of like that character, and a little creepy, and played that well. I think played pretty well. Only a couple scenes, but it's you can definitely feel that vibe with him. So I think, again, that this story makes sense because she's the one telling the story of her perspective, how she reads the events that are going on, if they happened, in her own POV. You don't really get a lot about her family. Actually, you don't see a lot besides her husband sort of being detached and seeing that she's detached, saying you're not the parent. So it's a reflection of that relationship. Her husband is also, you're not around. You're not taking care of the kids. You're not helping us. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. Whereas Toby is living that with Claire Danes, Rachel's life. And except she has a breakdown, and then she just sort of detaches from the world. And I think that's kind of interesting because it's a mirror of what's going on. It's not 100% reality. I think there's a lot of judgment, and they still reflect that path reflects Lizzie's life, or Libby's life, and I don't know if it's a real story in the story. I think it's sort of a fabrication of her and her going through this stuff. She vanishes. Claire Danes' character Rachel vanishes, so it's definitely a mirror of it. And I think the story is being told from her couple days, like Lost Weekend, of what she thinks happened with Toby and Rachel, if it really happened, because I think in the end they get back together. It says moments of reconciliation. From that perspective, it's an interesting story, and I think that's why her voice going through it makes it kind of interesting. Whereas if it was just for Toby and Rachel, I don't know if it'd be really that interesting. They're kind of pissy. They're kind of tit for tat. They're not really talking to each other. They're not engaged at all with dialogue. So to me, they're not really a couple. I don't know why they would get back together. It's kind of ugly the way it is with them. So I think that's sort of how I see it. I think it's a decent watch for the Libby Epstein character and the way that's being put through. I don't know if it needed all the episodes that it had. There's some background story that I just didn't care about. It just felt like middle-age crisis of people who have money and wealth and opportunity, and they don't really know how to deal with it. And people like those stories. People like about the fumbles in life of someone who has everything and they fumble, because everybody's going to have to say, hey, I'll stay home. If my spouse, my partner, was paying all the bills and taking care of everything, I don't know if I'd be that depressed. Maybe I'd find something else to do that would get me out, or get my creative juices going. If you're a creative person, you can always write. That was actually the one thing with me. She's a journalist, but she could always write. And I know you're sort of beaten down, but you have no concerns about economics. You can take some time and write. Your kids, I think, were pretty adult. They're up there. They weren't babies, so they're doing things on their own even. So you have these moments where you can find a place and do it. It's not easy. I'm not going to say it's easy. I think a lot of people say we can do this, we can do that, but it's never easy. So I think this is where where things really matter for a person, and sort of this fantasy world of, maybe that's why people like these books. They say, hey, I wish I had that luck. I wish I had that. So they see these people in miserable positions in their lives, and then other people say, hey, I wish I had that luck. I wish I could do that, and I'd be okay. So that's sort of where I see it, and that's, in my opinion, the only likable thing about it. I think there's a lot of things I don't like about it. I think that's the most likable thing about it. So, is it worth a watch? I think you could get into it. I think you might get bored of it really quick. The Toby Fleishman character is kind of irritating throughout the whole thing. It's just even the cadence of it, the way he speaks. I think he's an old. Jesse Eisenberg's an older individual now, so I don't know if that rhythm or that tempo of speech works anymore. It sort of worked when he was playing younger characters, and he just sort of hasn't gotten older with his character development, and it's just the same guy, except it's 10 years later, but he looks pretty much the same, and it's just whiny and complaining, very Woody Allen. I don't really care. Again, the whole season talks about him hooking up constantly and having like a failed relationship with a woman who's a beard of a famous senator, and it's sort of like this fantasy world of once you get divorced and you're middle age and you got a little money, guys are just pushing away tail, and I think that's another fantasy thing for the audience, not necessarily for the story, but for the audience. And you have Claire Danes, who has one indiscretion after she's divorced, and he loses his shit. Now, granted, it's with a married man, but also Toby is actually dating a married woman. So there's the woman that's the beard. There is a double standard, and that's not cool. So again, this is part of the storytelling of where we are, where we land. I don't find either of them likable. I find actually Toby very unlikable in a lot of ways. I think he's just sort of, I think a woman gets promoted over him, so there's a little bit of that too. He's running around, again, he's sort of like in the woman's stereotype, where he has to run with the kids, and they don't want to promote him because he's too busy with home life, and he's not devoting enough work time, without pay. And that's a comment on us, American society at all, that totally, that we're expected to give all in for the job and not really worry about home. And that's the opposite of the rest of the world usually, unless you're like slave labor. You're the rest of the world, or you're countries that are aligned with America. It's, home is priority. Home is always priority. Family is always priority. Other stuff, it's just work. It's just work to get by, to keep things good at home. It's to live. So I think that's a nice little commentary on how things are. But he's not a likable character. Libby, to me, is sort of flawed, likable. She's sort of lost in her path. I think really Fleishman in trouble, I don't know if it's her imagining Fleishman in trouble. Now, Fleishman could be Rachel or Toby. So originally I thought it was Toby, but it's both of them are in trouble of how they're trying to cope, this midlife crisis they're having, of what roles are they playing, where they see themselves, and where they actually are. And I think Libby's having that same self-doubt, and she's talking about it, and she's trying to relive her youth a little bit, or reconnect to happier times, lost in those thoughts, lost in the friendship with her and Toby, and I think Seth Morris is their other buddy who gets married, and she's broken because he's getting married now, and why is he doing that? Marriage isn't a good thing. He should stop. So there's a lot of that commentary going through. So who's the audience for this? Probably middle-aged people who aren't that successful, and enjoy seeing people who are successful sort of floundering and suffering, and say, see, we're not that different. I wish I had that. So you have a little bit of that in there. Is it likable? It's okay. It's not great. I don't know where they will go this season 2. They're just kind of silly. There's moments of it. I just don't know, what kind of moments you can really pull from it. There's a few good moments. I think everybody's sort of a pain in the ass and pampered, and a little bit like, kids go to camp from the city and all this stuff, and things go bad at camp, and he has to pull them back, and he was happy they were at camp because now he can hook up with people and get like these booty calls on the phone, and he's rushing to that between work and everything, leaving his kids alone and going there at night. Again, I don't know, where the roles are and where the stereotypes are, and like I said, not really likable. Claire Danes, I don't find likable in this either. So there's a lot of tension, and this, again, perspective from Libby of how she treated her life, or anxiety over being a wife, being a mother, and meeting the in-laws, and the in-laws are very Jewish, so it's very important to Jesse. But if you go by to Toby, but if you go by Jewish law, because they don't have a Jewish mother, the kids aren't Jewish. So that's even interesting again with the role reversal, that if it was a Jewish wife, the kids would be Jewish. But I think, I know some factions of Judaism allow either parent, and they would be allowed as a Jew, but most of them, if I remember, the really formal ones in Orthodox communities only allow it if it can be traced to the mother, because you never know who the father is, you always know who the mother is, and that's the thinking behind that. So, all right, that's my review on Fleishman. Thanks for the revisit. I'll be doing some more stuff. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll link another episode below. Please subscribe if you can. Share, subscribe, and maybe if you want to, come on the show and we'll talk about some things. All right.